Let's move on to the so-called birthright citizenship case, which isn't, again, directly about, it's not going to implicate birthright citizenship, I think, as much as people maybe anticipate. It might. But and I also got to say, just, as a note, like, we talk about that section 1983, the assault on all of the laws from Reconstruction. Like, I have always considered Reconstruction to be sort of like the actual founding of this country as we live it today, in the same way that like rabbinic Judaism is the Judaism that we practice today, as opposed to like when we had high priests and we were doing, taking a lamb and sacrificing it on the altar. We're living in a Reconstruction world, but this court really is trying to sort of bring us back to just like 1864.
I argued, Sam, that people who frame this court as an attack on the 20th century, an attack on the civil rights era, an attack on the Warren Court, that's old news. The Supreme Court has won its battle against the 20th century. It has won its battle against the Warren Court. And talking about that is talking about the last war. The Supreme Court has moved on, not to fighting the 20th century, but to fighting the 19th century, to fighting the Reconstruction era, to fighting what Eric Foner calls the second founding of this country. They don't like that either. They don't like the Reconstruction era either. And they have moved on to directly attacking the laws and amendments and statutes and precedents that came out of that second founding, came out of the Reconstruction era. And once again, they're winning. They're winning their second civil war without firing a shot. So we are now literally relitigating things, not that we fought about in the 1960s, but that we fought a hot war about in the 1860s, and we're losing. We're losing to this new Confederacy.
And it feels like they're not even arguing their way through it. They're just going, it's like they're just flicking a switch, essentially, and saying, we're just going to pluck, we're just hitting these switches and that's it. We're not going to have to argue or create some type of like, I mean,
we're just going to turn that off.
It would be fascinating if it wasn't so disturbing and having real world implications. This birthright citizenship case, it's unclear to me. It's unclear to me, like, does birthright citizenship still exist? Will it exist? Are there people now who are stateless or could be stateless? And then there's this, the main order question is, can a single judge issue an order to stay a law? And that to me seems unclear. Like, the whole thing seems still unclear where we're at.
Yeah, so you're asking a lot of questions that are difficult to answer because the Supreme Court's opinion itself was gobbledygook, right? Like you're kind of forced to guess at what they could mean because their legal reasoning was so loose and clownish again. I'll try to answer the question this way. At the top level, if you are a child born in this country after June 27th, 2025, all right, so if you were born on Friday or Saturday or Sunday or today, whether or not you're a citizen of this country now depends more on the state or county you were born in than whether or not you were born in America, right? Because what's going to happen is that some states, most states even, will uphold the concept of birthright citizenship, but some states will not. Right, we'll have some localities, I can think of Texas as one, that probably won't, right? And so now, as you take that child who's born yesterday, literally born yesterday, and you fast forward 15, 18, 20 years, their birth certificate might not be enough to prove their citizenship because they might not have gotten a valid birth certificate at birth because this random local official in Texas on Sunday might have denied them a birth certificate because the Supreme Court said they could. And the way that they said they could goes to this nationwide injunction argument, right? So like for your listeners to understand, like an injunction is just saying that the government wants to do a thing and we decide as the court, the government cannot do that, right? We preemptively decide the government's idea, law, program, whatever is illegal, right? So if they had a law saying, hey, we're going to take all the Jewish journalists and kick them out of the country, right? You, Sam, might go to court and say, hey, that seems horribly unconstitutional to me. I would like a ruling stopping the government from kicking me out of the country just because I'm a Jewish journalist, right? And a court might agree with you. A court might say, yeah, Sam, you're absolutely right. They cannot kick you out of the country. Now, before Friday, that ruling could apply nationwide. They can't kick any Jewish journalist out of the country just for being a Jewish journalist. But after Friday, according to the Supreme Court, that ruling can probably only apply to you, Sam. So you, Sam, went to court and you, Sam, got a ruling saying that you, Sam, as a Jewish journalist, cannot be kicked out of the country. And that's great for Sam. But what about the next guy? What about the next guy? What about the guy living in Texas? What about the guy living in Michigan? They have to sue themselves. They have to personally go to court to sue. Again, this obviously unconstitutional rule. They have to personally go to court and sue for themselves again and again and again and again and again. And even if 99% of them win, 1% of them will lose. And then we will have a two-tiered system where some Jewish journalists are going to be kicked out, but other Jewish journalists are not. And that's how it's going to be, according to the Supreme Court, until sometime in the future, perhaps soon, perhaps by next year, perhaps not soon, perhaps in 3 or 4 years, the Supreme Court will come back in and weigh in nationwide on whether or not Trump's unconstitutional laws are in fact unconstitutional, right? But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of chaos and confusion and uncertainty because the courts took away this fundamental ability of courts to enforce the law against the president.
And isn't the sort of the paradox here, and I can't remember if it was KBJ or Kagan who brought this up, is that let's assume that, to use your analogy, you have Jewish journalists after Jewish journalists, they win their cases. The government does not appeal them because they're like, look, there's, I don't know,
clearly wrong.
10,000 Jewish journalists in the country or 5,000 Jewish journalists country. We know they're not all going to come to court. There's maybe like 500 will come to court. We just won't appeal that. It will not rise to the Supreme Court. I mean, it would involve essentially somebody losing that case and then appealing so that it would rise up. And it's quite possible that if it went up to the first appellate level, the government just says, we're not going to contest. And that way it never rises up to the Supreme Court. And we don't have a law of the land anymore for something that's in the Constitution.
For citizenship, and to go back to what we were talking about in terms of the attack on the Reconstruction era and the attack on the 19th century, we have tried to do citizenship this way before. We have tried to live in a country where whether or not you were a citizen of that country depended on the state you were living in, right? We called that the antebellum period of America. That was the slavery period of America. That was the period where, as a black person, if I was born in Georgia, I had one set of rights, and if I was born in New York, I had a different one, right? Just depending on the happenstance of my birth. That way led to war. That way was so unworkable that it led to a shooting war, because you cannot have a country where some citizens are more equal than other citizens, all right? We're not living on the animal farm. But the Supreme Court brings us right back to that situation of potential two-tiered citizenship in this case. The other thing that I've heard a lot from liberals, you were talking about how the government might get around this by just not appealing adverse rulings against it. The other thing I've heard from a lot of liberals is this idea of a class action, right? That because the Supreme Court has made everybody sue individually, what needs to happen is that everybody needs to come together as a class of affected people and sue as a class action lawsuit. You see this all the time in environmental litigation. You saw it all the time in big tobacco litigation, trying to form a large class of people to tell the government that they're wrong on birthright citizenship. That's a great idea. That's a fine legal idea that this decision leaves open as a possibility, except that you have to remember that the exact same 6 people who just said the government could get away with this messing with of birthright citizenship can just as easily refuse to recognize and what's called certify a class action. And the Roberts Court has been notorious historically in denying certification of classes for various suits, right? For various things that are like much lower stakes than what we're talking about here. And the Roberts Court consistently denies class status to citizens. So there's every opportunity that we'll be here next year talking about a Supreme Court decision that decertifies a class 6-3, and we'll be trying to explain once again how that allows Trump to mess with birthright citizenship, right? Because the Supreme Court, if they've done it here, they can keep doing it. They can keep denying people their rights to sue the government. And just as the last point on that, Clarence Thomas basically says so in his concurrence to this opinion. Basically, don't you try the class actions. Don't you try it, because if you do, we're going to knock it down. He says that in his concurrence. Does he have 5 votes for that? I don't know, but I wouldn't assume that he doesn't.
And lastly, is there a scenario where, okay, I'm born in New York, but I go to Tennessee, they don't recognize, birthright citizenship. Can they just, in the same way that like, in the early days of marriage equality, if I got into a same-sex marriage in Massachusetts, but I go to, Georgia and want visitation rights because my partner's in the hospital, you're not married to him. Well, I am, but you're married in Massachusetts. We don't recognize that. I mean, is there a potential scenario like where it's just like, we're going to deport, we deport you if you're in, if you travel to Georgia, even though you may be safe in New York?
Sam, that's the most likely scenario. That's the most likely thing to happen. That when you have, and again,
it's like a fugitive slave law type of situation.
I'm about to say, we've tried it this way before. It was called the Dred Scott decision, right? What was the whole point? What was the whole issue behind the Dred Scott decision, right? That my man went to Missouri. Missouri was a free state, and he was like, "I'm free." And then they were like, "No, you got to go back to Kentucky." And he was like, "Well, no, I'm free in Missouri." And the whole point of the Dred Scott decision was that actually a black man has no rights the white man is bound to respect, right? It was this person, Dred Scott, who did have citizenship rights where he could be recaptured and re-pulled back in to a situation where he had no rights simply by traveling across state lines. That there was no such thing as forever free. That's exact. So when I'm saying it's the most likely scenario, the scenario that you outlined is the most likely scenario. It is the one based on precedent in history. It is what this country has done before. So absolutely, there's a situation. There's a possibility. There's a likely possibility that a person will have a certain suite of rights and protections if they stay in New York or New Jersey. But if they go to Pennsylvania, it becomes more questionable. And if they go all the way to West Virginia, they're done.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.